The future tense in Spanish is used to talk about things that will happen. Remember that you have already learned how to talk about things that are going to happen by using ir a plus the infinitive, conjugating ir in the present tense, and adding a in an infinitive to say that something is going to happen. Again, the real future tense in Spanish focuses on things that will happen. May not seem like much of a difference, but sometimes it can be important. Sometimes it is just a matter of personal preference. The future tense requires two steps, and this is going to be a little bit different than other tenses that you've learned. The first step is to select a verb, and the second step is to add the correct ending. We do not, with the future tense, cut off the AR, ER, or IR before adding our new endings. We leave them there. These are the endings for the future tense, and since we're not cutting off the AR, ER, and IR, we don't have any reason to distinguish between AR endings and ER and so forth, so we only have this one set of endings. As, a, amos, ace, an. Notice that all of these except for amos have an accent mark. That's very important because it does affect the way the word is pronounced. Let's look at a sample sentence. I will talk to you tomorrow. Yo blank contigo mañana. Our verb is to talk. We know that is hablar. Since the subject is yo, we'll look at the yo ending, which is e with an accent mark. And again, all we do is add that ending onto our verb. We don't need to cut anything off, we just stick it to the end like that. So we have yo hablaré contigo mañana. If instead we wanted to say we'll talk tomorrow, our verb of course would still be hablar, and then we would find the appropriate ending for nosotros, which is hemos. Hablaremos mañana. Of course we would capitalize that to make it a complete sentence. This works exactly the same again whether we have an ER verb or an IR verb or whatever the case may be. There are, not surprisingly, several different irregular verbs in the future tense. These irregulars can generally be divided into three categories. I call these three categories drop the E, val to D, and change the spelling. Let's take a look at each of these three, starting with drop the E. Examples of drop the E verbs include saber, haber, poder, and querer. Let's look at the verb saber. Knowing what we now know about the future tense, we would expect the forms of saber to be saberé, saberás, saberá, saberemos, saberéis, saberán. However, since it's a drop the E, we're going to go back and we're going to cut the E out of each of these. Remember, we just do this because this happens to be a drop the E irregular verb in the future tense. So instead of what we had before, we have sabré, sabrás, sabrá, sabremos, sabréis, sabrán. The same would go for any of these others, habré, podré, querré, and so forth. Val to D verbs follow a very similar pattern. Here are some examples: poner, salir, tener, venir. Looking at the verb poner, again we would expect to see poneré, ponerás, ponerá, and so forth. But since this is a val to D, we're going to take that E before the R. We're going to change it to a D. Which gives us pondré, pondrás, pondrá. We would see the same thing with salir, sadré, sadrás, tener, tendré, tendrás, venir, vendré, vendrás, and so forth. Change the spelling verbs aren't quite as simple. Here we have a couple of examples, decir and hacer. For these, we have to actually change the root, or the stem. So decir gets the stem, dir, dir. Hacer gets a similar stem, har. And then we add our standard endings. That then gives us diré, dirás, dirá, and so forth, as well as haré, harás, hará, haremos, and so on. So again, for the future tense, our steps are easy. Just pick a verb and add the ending without cutting anything off. We only have the one set of endings. Of course, there are three types of irregular verbs, but as you should have noticed, even they follow those basic rules and they use the same endings.